The Phlegrean Fields in Italy were once the site of a strange experiment for tourists. The Cave of Dogs, near Lake Agnano, opens into a slope that ends in a fumarole emitting carbon dioxide due to the volcanic nature of the area. The carbon dioxide settles on the bottom of the lowest reaches of the cave, which makes it impossible for short animals to breathe. Tourists had been visiting the cave for centuries, as attested by records written by Pliny the Elder, but more modern visitors like Mark Twain began writing about the dog experiment that tourists carried out to make a spectacle of the carbon dioxide layer. The English had a custom called cock throwing, in which a chicken was tied to a pillar, or any high structure, so participants could hurl specially made sticks at it. The spectacle was usually held on Shrove Tuesday, a time in which the social restrictions on positions such as apprentices and other laborers were loosened enough for them to engage in somewhat less than highbrow fun. Sometimes cock throwing was held for fun, but other times it involved a bit of gambling. Participants had to pay a fee to throw sticks at the chicken. If they hit it with a killing blow, they got to keep the carcass for cooking. If they broke its legs or otherwise made it unable to stand, the chicken would be strung up to a pole that would hold it up so the contest could continue. If someone simply knocked the chicken off whatever it was roped to, depending on the rules, it became a game of who could catch it the quickest. The winner would keep the cock.
In Shakespeare's time, one of the main competitors of his theatre was the Bear Gardens. It was an area dedicated to animal baiting, which was essentially putting an animal like a bear in a pit, then setting other animals, usually dogs, loose on it. The ensuing battle was a widely popular bloodsport at the time, frequented even by Elizabeth I. King James I used animals like lions and polar bears from the Crown's private collection for private animal baiting events. Bears were tied to a pole in a pit. Dogs were set upon them, and the bear had to first fight its way free from the rope, and then defeat the dogs. Since bears were expensive to obtain and transport to the gardens, the fights were usually stopped after enough dogs died. The bear would then live to fight another day, as it were, and some even became minor celebrities. Other animals were used in the baiting games, including a chimpanzee riding a horse that spectators loved to see cry out whenever it was attacked. People were likewise fond of sicking dogs on bulls, since the bull would hurl them into the air with its horns, much to the delight of the crowd. Goose pulling was a European bloodsport carried out as early as the 17th century. A goose was strung up by its legs, and then riders on horseback would take turns racing beneath it and attempting to pull its head off. Oil was slathered over the goose's neck to make it more difficult to grab onto. The goose was also alive, so it would be struggling to get free, which also made pulling its head off more difficult. Even during the time period when goose pulling was popular, it was criticized as barbaric. Even after it later made its way across the Atlantic Ocean to the U.S., it was still frowned upon and eventually died out in most areas. Today there are modified versions of goose pulling held throughout Europe using dead geese that were humanely killed by a veterinarian, although animal rights activists still take issue with the competitions. The modern usage of the word geek is a large change from its original meaning of, roughly, fool. Geek shows were a carnival act from the late 1800s and early 1900s where a geek, the central performer, would act like a wild man or woman and chase animals around a stage to bite their heads off. The act was extremely degrading to the performer, who was usually an alcoholic or drug abuser paid with alcohol or narcotics. Some famous geeks incorporated additional aspects into their act, or played up their wildness for the crowds. Ika, a famous female geek, was also a snake charmer and wild girl. The geek show eventually fell out of fashion as interest in animal rights grew, and biting off animal heads became more horrifying than entertaining. One of the most controversial movies of all time, Cannibal Holocaust got its director brought up on charges of animal cruelty and murder. The murder charges didn't stick, as the newspaper that reported the on-screen deaths as real turned out to be spreading false information. The director disproved the charges by bringing one of the supposed victims to the trial. But the animal cruelty charges got him fined when the on-screen animal deaths proved to be real. A large turtle was killed for the movie, and a monkey's brutal death was filmed twice. Meaning 2 monkeys were killed. In defense, the director said that the animals were killed, but also eaten by the actors and crew. That didn't stop authorities from condemning the killings, and they found the director guilty of animal cruelty because the deaths were done for the purpose of making a film. Quetzalcoatl is a festival held in Xitilcom of Yucatan, Mexico, where people once filled piñatas with live animals and beat them to death. Local superstition held that it was once associated with the rainy season. The local children rounded up animals, usually iguanas or a marsupial called an opossum, shoved them into piñatas, and then beat them with sticks. Any animal that escaped was trampled. Other festivities included hanging up a duck by its feet on a wooden structure, then participants racing to tear its head off. When animal rights activists voiced their concerns about the festival to the local government, the Izamal municipality worked with the local Catholic Church to end the festival as it was once carried out. Nowadays, live animals are no longer harmed during the festivities.